We do further strictly enjoin and require all persons whatever, who have either willfully or inadvertently seated themselves upon any lands within the countries above described, or upon any other lands not having been ceded to or purchased by us, forthwith to remove themselves from such settlements.
With the end of the French and Indian War, King George III sought to bring peace and order to the volatility in North America, while Parliament sought a way to relieve their massive war debts. But as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In this episode, we will discuss the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and the beginning of Parliament's attempts to levy the American colonists. And we will see where it caused nothing but anger and frustration from their North American subjects. Hello history friends, and welcome back to my channel. This is Historical USA, where we discuss the people, places, and events that have shaped the fabric of America. If you haven't already, please remember to subscribe to the channel, ring that bell so that you get notified every time I post a new video. At the end of the French and Indian War, France relinquished much of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys and Canada to Britain. At this news, the 13 colonies were filled with optimism and relief following their victory in the French and Indian War. For generations, the colonists had lived in terror of the French and their native allies' assaults and encroachment on the western frontier. The Treaty of Paris, which was signed in February of 1763, formalized the results of the war. The pact gave Britain control over substantial portions of French-held territory in North America. Canadian sovereignty was ceded to Britain. More significantly, England would acquire almost half of French Louisiana, an area nearly twice the size of the existing 13 colonies. From the Mississippi River in the west to existing colonial borders in the east, from the Great Lakes in the north to the Gulf of Mexico in the south. These acquisitions sparked intense interest in the 13 colonies, thrilling settlers, farmers, and land speculators alike. Now, due to the rapid population explosion in the 13 colonies during the 1700s, much of the high-quality land had already been claimed. Large-scale fresh territory like this was now opening to the west, and the colonists were ready to take full advantage of that. As soon as Montcalm surrendered in 1760, many colonists were already prepared to move their families west. Many affluent colonists turned to land speculation in the hopes of acquiring large areas of land in the West to resell for profit at a later date. Companies engaged in land speculation were established or expanded, drawing in customers and investors. Wealthy elites also positioned themselves to lay claims in the West. Among these private speculators were George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and the Lee family, all of whom hoped to make large sums of money. As one of Washington's biographers, James T. Flexner, wrote, quote, "In no other direction did Washington demonstrate such acquisitiveness," try saying that 5 times fast, "acquisitiveness as in his quest for the ownership of land," end quote. Washington would even write to one of his land surveyors, a Captain William Crawford, quote, "Who neglects the present opportunity of hunting out good lands, and in some measure making and distinguishing them for their own, will never regain it." Washington wasn't going to miss an opportunity like this. According to historian Ethan M. Fisherman, by the time the Royal Proclamation of 1763 was enacted, Washington's land holdings had already grown to 15,000 acres. Fisherman said, quote, "But he remained unsatiated. Washington's quest for land was resolute, even when he knew he was not entitled to it. He declared that only a fool would bypass the chance to acquire new land. Hello, history friends. I am so excited to announce that we have partnered with Classical Learner. I am a historian, but more importantly, I am a homeschooling mother. Now, I get questions all the time from other homeschool parents and other parents concerned they might not be teaching their children enough social studies or civics or history. Classical Learner is a great way to help your child in all of those areas. Their children's book series, Cubs to Bears, will help your children understand things like what is the First Amendment, what is the Second Amendment, what is the Federal Reserve. They will teach your children things like critical thinking and health and nutrition. One thing that I'm really excited is they are also now rolling out historical works. Their first is George Washington by Ferdinand Schmidt that was originally published in 1911. Now, this book tells the story of George Washington from his upbringing to his ambitions to his ascension as the father of a new nation. It provides a really unique insight into the grievances of the American colonists and the issues they had with England and the culture that made 1776 possible. This is part of Classical Learner's mission to take lost, unpolitically correct history and make it available to the public. And you can get 10% off of any of these products when you use the coupon code HistoricalUSA. You can visit the link down below in the description bar if you are interested in taking a look at some of their children's books and some of these great historical works. Now back to the video. Now, at the same time as the colonists were making plans for settling the West, native tribes were making plans to defend their land from white settlers. In May of 1763, Pontiac launched an attack against Fort Detroit. Now, Pontiac's rebellion, which I have already done a video on, and you can check that out here in the corner, and I will have that linked in the description below. If you are interested in learning more about the Native American perspective on all of what I'm about to talk about, go and check out that video. We do more of a deep dive into the Native Americans' thoughts and feelings on them essentially having a new landlord in Britain. So if you haven't checked out that video, I highly suggest you go check that out, especially if you are interested in understanding the Native American perspective to all that I am talking about. Now, Pontiac's rebellion demonstrated one huge glaring flaw, that Britons had a fragile hold over her new territories. In order to protect the colonists that were now eager to colonize the Ohio country, British commanders had no desire to engage in prolonged battle with Native Americans due to the enormous debts they had spent fighting a worldwide war. The British government was also appalled by these attacks and rebellion of the Native Americans. It recognized that similar rebellions were probable if Native American leaders were not appeased. Now, in October of 1763, King George III issued a Royal Proclamation concerning his newly acquired territory. For the most part, it was considered an interim solution until a new colonial policy could be developed. The proclamation was an extensive document outlining new government domain in Canada, Florida, and the Caribbean. More specifically, though, it prohibited movement from the 13 colonies into the western regions, thus establishing a boundary line or a proclamation line along the Appalachian Mountains, and also commanded that settlers could not establish themselves west of this line, saying, quote, "We do hereby strictly forbid, on pain of our displeasure, all our loving subjects from making any purchases or settlements whatever, or taking possession of any of the lands above reserved, without our especial leave and license for that purpose first obtained." It mandated also the immediate withdrawal of British subjects who had claimed territory west of the proclamation line, including those who had already established themselves in the Ohio Valley, saying, quote, "We do further strictly enjoin and require all persons whatever who have either willfully or inadvertently seated themselves upon any lands within the countries above described, or upon any other lands not having been ceded to or purchased by us, forthwith to remove themselves from such settlements," end quote. Under the terms of the proclamation, the western regions were reserved for the native tribes, with hunting and fishing rights granted to specific tribes according to region. Colonists were forbidden to encroach onto these lands, to seize it or settle on it, and those who already moved west were now ordered to return. As you can imagine, this point of the proclamation outraged many colonists. It not only blocked the goals of land speculators and settlers, but also disappointed and frustrated veterans of the French and Indian War, some of whom had been promised land in the West in exchange for their service. The colonists had fought for generations against the French and their native allies. They felt that the land was fought for with their blood, and the natives that had sided with the French should also cede any claims to that land, just as the French had, not be protected and preserved by their own government, the British. The edict also restricted colonial trade with Native Americans in the region, only allowing those who held a special license from not colonial governments, but Parliament were permitted to trade with the natives. Something that angered not just the colonists, but also Native Americans who had built their societies on trade with colonial governments. Now, many people, including George Washington, believed that the policy was merely temporary in order to achieve more harmony with indigenous tribes. One point I'd like to make is George Washington, after the Royal Proclamation, he knows that a lot of the men that he fought with would lose out on their land bounties that was promised to them west of the Appalachian Mountains. So George Washington actually went forth and bought out a lot of veterans' land bounties. Now, the British and their order had a monumental task in order to enforce this. British soldiers sought with very limited success to force inhabitants to leave the new region and prevent additional settlers from crossing the bounties. For a time, they did try forcibly removing settlers, even burning some settlements to the ground in order to dissuade white settlers from moving into the reserved area. And that worked for a little while, but not for long. The indigenous territory would soon begin being encroached on again, causing fresh issues with many of the tribes. Parliament had authorized up to 10,000 troops to be dispatched to the region. And when the situation worsened, the British reinforced their presence by occupying abandoned French frontier forts and erecting more defense works along the Proclamation line. Now, if you've watched my video on Pontiac's rebellion, you know that that also was a sore spot for the Native Americans. The expenditures of all of this expanded presence and building would result in higher taxes among the colonists. An estimated 30,000 colonials would cross the line and settle in the restricted area during the 5 years that followed. And on paper, the Proclamation of 1763 sounded like a really good idea to bring peace between white settlers and natives. However, all it did was kind of make everybody mad. Thus, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.